Games, board games. We'll be talking about all sorts of games, but we're not going to shout. We are going to today be talking about the amount of playtesting, that you need. It might vary for a game where you read a lot and make lots of strategic decisions, and it might be more for a game where you have some missions and the nature of those missions changes the game. But for a party game, it won't be the same. But we'll talk about the amount of playtesting required in a game. It's what we're talking about. How much playtesting is appropriate? I'm not gonna shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever people are. It is 10 a.m. UK time, and this is episode 551 of Bezzy Beats and Board Game Blether. And by the way, Alan, episode 600, I believe, is happening on April the 13th. And we're more than halfway there. And by halfway, I obviously mean halfway in the current hundreds, not like that we've passed the 300 mark. But yet, and we've got lots of things to look forward to inside this show and outside the show. Things coming up like Aircon, which I believe we're going to both be at.
But, yes, looking forward to that. Ooh, getting out, going somewhere with games.
It's
gamers.
very, very close, isn't it? Like only 2 weeks and a day away, I'll be there.
I may shout. Sorry.
At Aircon. So not on the show.
Not on the show, no.
Yes. In less than 2 weeks and a day, I will have someone come over, and then I've decided we're going
less than 2 weeks.
Drive over, set up on the Thursday. Like, got a few. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But and you know what? I might come. I'll be doing these shows from Aircon. But it'll be like a quick 5-10 minute thing, and so I might pop over just to give you a quick wave if you're not. Even if you're playtesting, maybe I'll wave and you'll wave back. Who knows? Maybe people still get to see your face in your, shall we call it, your natural convention habitat?
Oh yes, my natural habitat, a convention. Excellent. Although it will be my first time at Aircon. We'll talk about that later. Yep.
And talking about people at Aircon, it's Josie who will be helping me.
Oh,
hello, Josie.
Hi, Josie.
And I'm excited, and I didn't manage to get the box or package sent yesterday. That is going to be sent today after this show. But yes, today, as you can see at the bottom, we are talking about how much playtesting is appropriate. I am personally going to use 3 different games as vague examples. Kitty Cataclysm, which is a super simple game, but it's actually needed a lot more playtesting than you might imagine. A game about I'm still working out the name of this. A game about judging which object best matches 3 criteria after everyone quickly grabs and then does a short pitch. So it's the quickly grabbing and also the 3 criteria, which sets it apart from games like, it's similar to Snake Oil or Apples to Apples, all sorts of judge-based games. It follows a long tradition.
It's not got a good acronym there, though, I have to say. It
doesn't
sound like it's got a good acronym at all.
I mean, none of my Bezzy bargain bags have a good acronym, but there are names that hopefully you don't get too bored whilst listening to the name of. Hopefully it takes you like, I'm trying to keep it less than 20 words, but 10 to 20 words is my target.
Right, okay.
And
Punchy.
Also Yogi. Those are the 3 games that I'm going to use as examples. Do you know what you're going to use as examples?
I would like to use Kingmaker, because that's something I've been working on a lot. The newest Pocket Campaigns game, which we're currently doing, War of the Three Sanchos. And then actually, I think I'll use a game I did ages ago, which was called Mind Meld.
Ooh.
Yes.
And do you have a copy of those? Well, I can see Kingmaker in the background there.
Yeah,
at least the board.
I haven't got a copy of Mind Meld, but I'm sure we can.
You can describe it, and we can use our imaginations.
Yeah. Yep. Could even technically there's probably a link to it on Board Game Geek, which might be helpful. It's a magazine. It's a magazine game anyway. Oh, actually, if you give me a second, I think I've got a copy behind me in the bookshelf. I could just get that, couldn't I?
Okay.
That'd be good. Yeah, I'll just get that.
So let me start off doing recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights. So what have been some of your recent highlights? What have you been up to? Yesterday, I tried to take the day off. I slept quite a bit. I slept 6 hours during the day. And then I ended up night doing Twitter stuff, watching cartoons. What did I watch? I watched the Cuphead show, which really good fun. I enjoyed it. Also watched a new interactive cartoon by Charlie Brooker, who did Bandersnatch. Are you familiar with Bandersnatch, the interactive movie thing that was on Netflix?
No, not at all, actually.
So Bandersnatch is definitely worth watching / playing. So it's an interactive movie by the person who did Black Mirror, and it delves into the tale of someone who's making a pick your path style adventure book.
Yeah.
And they are programming, and then it's kind of self-referential. It gets dark. It does at some point deal with I think there's some drug abuse and there is some death in it. So, but it is black comedy. So it's I wouldn't say it's like, honestly, it's a fun thing to do, and it was quite interesting that it pushed the possibilities of, hey, this is what an interactive movie could look like.
Right, yeah.
And I think it's definitely worth checking out. And then what's recently popped up is, let me actually remind myself what it was called, because this new one was a cartoon. And so it's like an old style cartoon. It's a cat burglar who's trying, and it is actually called Cat Burglar Interactive, where the cat burglar, you try to break into a building, you try to overcome the guard dog, and then you try to pull off this incredible heist. And along the way, you're essentially playing a quiz game. And so the quizzes aren't, hey, who did this? And you've got to answer. It's ridiculous things like, hey, which one is a muscle? Is it the gluteus maximus? Or is it, and then it'll give you a Roman circus maximus, something like that. And then you've got to answer 3 times correctly in order to have the cat succeed. If you answer wrongly, then the cat fails and it loses one of its lives. And then you might or might not get to the end. Either way, it feels like there's enough content, and because of its, this is going to sound harsh, but because of the throwaway content of the slapstick cartoon nature, you never feel sad or obligated to see it all. With Bandersnatch, there was the strong desire within me to see all of it. But within this, if I succeed, hey, I get to see a funny bit where they succeed and then it goes to the next thing. If I fail, then often there's a funny bit of the, like, Wile E. Coyote style, the cat fails and then the guard dog gets it. And if you fail completely, then God sends you down and tells you to go back to the start. And it's just fun. And I played it, I want to say 3 times. The first time I died very quickly. I didn't quite understand what was happening. I didn't realize the format. It was always 3 things that match a certain criteria. And then by the second, third time, I was having a bit of fun. It was a good giggle. And I was really impressed by how much they vary it and the amount of animation that's gone on. So there must be, there must be many hours worth to make sure that each time you play it, when it might be 10 to 20 minutes to watch, you are still going to see all new content.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a feat, actually, isn't it?
I was really impressed. Yeah. I would definitely recommend Cat Burglar if you like old style silly children's cartoons that are slapstick. Definitely check that out.
I will have a look at that.
And firstly, catching up with the chat. Good morning, Alex. It is lovely to see you. Good morning, Joseph. No, the cat did not have 9 lives, and the first time that you use alive, it does explain why it had 9 lives, and it does flash back to how it lost the first 6 lives, which is quite an amusing tangent.
Okay.
And so they do actually explain that. As far as I'm concerned, if you get to the end and you steal the thing, that is the ending. And once I completed it the second time, the 2 paintings were next to one another. So in theory, maybe I could keep watching it over and over, and there'd be like 9 paintings. I don't know, but I don't think there is a. And hello, Nicholas. It is lovely to see you. And yeah, more shout outs for Bandersnatch. And this is obviously very, very different in tone, but it's written by Charlie Brooker as well, which really surprised me because because obviously Charlie Brooker, best known for very dry, black, dark humor about current events. And so this is quite a departure for them.
That's good. Yeah. I mean,
But
people do very, very different things, don't they? I mean, the designer of
Mage Knight doing code names.
Yes, I was thinking of, oh god,
the designer of Seize the Power doing Yogi.
The German politics game, which often, for some reason, my mind's going completely blank.
Die Macher.
God grief. Yeah, Die Macher, who also designed the kitchen game, the one where you have flippy things and you're adding ingredients. It's got my neck. Ridiculous that I can't remember.
I will check that out.
Anyway,
whilst you explain some of your own recent highlights.
Well, the very recent highlights. I played King's Guild last night. We had face-to-face gaming on Tuesday, and 5-4 introduced King's Guild to us. I don't know if anybody knows that one. I'd not heard of it before. It's a Euro, and the kind of scenario is you are a guild, and there's several guilds. Each player's a guild. It's up to 6 actually, I think. Although it says 2 to. It says best 3 to 4, which I think it's fair enough. We had 5. Takes well on the board on the Geek it says 60 to 120 minutes, and we took, because it was our first game with 5. It took us a little bit longer than that. And you are gathering resources and building buildings and employing people who you get in little cards, and scoring points from all this stuff. And then halfway through the game, because it's called the King's Guild, halfway through the game, the king dies, and you can bid for a statue for the king, put that onto your array of stuff. And then right at the end, the Council of Elders comes along, and the leading guild effectively becomes the new ruler of the land. That's the kind of the way it works. It's a kind of hand management style game, because you're collecting during the game, you're achieving quests, which are all laid out in front of all the players. Usually have, I think it's about 6 quests you have, and you're paying resources to give equipment to the actual people who are going to complete the quests. So resources like cloth and leather and metal. So you're making usually bits of weapons or bits of armor, bits of clothing, so that they can go off and complete the quest. So you're not actually doing the quest because you're a guild, you're just funding the quests. And you if you successfully resource that quest, you gain the quest card. That gets you a point, and you also get a treasure from completing the quest. And those treasures vary from things like relics, which is set collection, in the usual logarithmic scoring fashion, or they could be charms, which get you a set number of points, or they could be just gold and things which get you more money to buy other things with. So it's a kind of hand management, because you get collecting these treasure cards, and you can sometimes swap them out, swap in better ones, and set collection type of things. It's quite fun. It's a very competent Euro.
Competent doesn't sound like a strong recommendation.
It was fun. I think it wasn't. I would say it's not particularly innovative. but
So
it does what it
one
says
that
on the
you'd happily play again,
I'd happily
one
play
that you'd
again. Yeah.
happily suggest other people try if it becomes available to them, but not something that you think anyone listening should necessarily rush out or work to get to try it.
No, I think it's a solid, well-designed game. It was fun to play, and we were playing it with my eldest daughter Vicky and her husband, who they're not hardcore gamers, but they were coping quite well.
I mean, you
in
say that, although Vicky, you know, is
Vicky does.
at a
She's a
point
games
that you've
illustrator.
decided to kind of spend a good chunk of your life illustrating games. I mean, you're a pretty hardcore gamer in my book.
But not hardcore player, I think. There's just, I mean, in the sense that she doesn't play complex games. I mean, this is a 2.43 weight game on the Geek, designed by Matthew Austin, and it's published by Mirrorbox Games, who I'd not heard of. They're a small Los Angeles-based company, and I've not heard of them before. This came out in 2018, so I suspect it was probably kickstarted because it's got large plastic miniatures in it, which I thought was a bit odd. The actual plastic miniatures, which is quite I think a rare. Is that a rarity nowadays? It's more people go for resin or wood, don't they, nowadays?
I mean, it so depends. And like, yes, miniatures do often do better on Kickstarters.
Yeah.
And someone was, I think I watched a video by Lords of the Board yesterday where they were talking about how they didn't like Kickstarters so much because they do seem to go towards. And Alex says 2.42 is my limit.
Yeah.
I am going to say, go back slightly. It is Karl-Heinz Spiel, who made Die Macher, and there is an image of Die Macher, and they have also designed a la carte, which does
that's the other game.
like quite a game.
My memory's obviously going because yes, we've got both of those games, and I was very surprised when I saw a la carte. It's, as you can see, it's got little saucepans or frying pans or whatever, which you use frying pans for pancakes. And you can toss the pancake, and if you can catch the pancake in your frying pan, you get extra points. So it's a lovely, funny little family game. In contrast to Die Macher, which is a heavyweight, very heavyweight.
Before we get into the playtesting discussion, just Alex and Josie both saying they played through Bandersnatch a few times to get what they considered a good ending. And when I played it, I basically spent the entire half day with it. I spent a good 4 or 5 hours with it.
Oh, right, okay.
And I believe I got all the content and endings by the end, because I basically went down every possible binary choice. You know what I mean? But that's the thing about that game, because it presented itself as a choice, and because there was a story, and because I felt like I wanted to understand the story better and what was going on, and the different paths actually interacted with one another, if you know what I mean, in a weird fourth wall break sort of way.
There was a temptation with that type of game to explore all the pathways. I remember when I was playing, I used to play Ambush, which is another one of those paragraph games. It's a war game, but it's a paragraph game, and there is replay value. So the temptation there is to play it first kind of properly, and then second time go on and make lots of mistakes and see what actually happens when you make mistakes, to explore the rest of the content. Otherwise, you'll never know how have they managed the idea that people might do weird things. That can be quite fun.
And I think that Bandersnatch, it pushed me to do that. It tapped into my sense of completism, and it was worthwhile doing that. Whereas with Cat Burglar, completely different thing. I'm not spoiling it by saying, yes, if you answer correctly, the cat is going to go into the museum. It's going to steal the painting, and then it becomes rich. And there's a final comedy bit gag at the end, and then it asks you if you want to play again. That's not spoiling anything, because you know exactly what's going to happen. The plot isn't the point. The point is, hey, maybe you are mildly amused at the old while Looney Tunes style stuff going on, and if you're in that kind of mood, yeah, you probably will enjoy it. I mean,
Yep.
yeah, it's worth checking out anyway. You probably will know within, I would say, 4 minutes whether you want to keep playing. And if you give up after 4 minutes, that's perfectly reasonable. I think that as humans, we should be willing to try things with the intention
Yeah.
that, hey, I might stop after 4 minutes. And I know Michael's very big on this, even with board games, saying, hey, let's play half a board game and then let's
Yes.
abandon it if one person isn't having fun at all.
That's what Fi said when Fi introduced the game to us yesterday. They
Mhm.
said, let's play a couple of turns, and if people don't want to keep going, we can just we can do something else. But we all decided that actually, yeah, we did want to keep going with it, which is good. The other highlight, I mean, looking at King's Guild, we started rewatching because the new Kingsman has come out. We decided we'd rewatch the Kingsman films, which is a very, very tenuous link to King's Guild because it's got King in it, you know, but it's very tenuous. But so we watched Kingsman Secret Service, which is just it's a lovely, fun, escapist, lots of shooting and running around and screaming type of film. But in it's a well directed, fun little piece of escapism. So you know, quite old now actually. I think Kingsman the original.
Let's go towards the topic of the day, and of course, I hope everyone knows Alan, but for those who don't, Alan is a lovely designer, comes over every couple of weeks to chat, currently working on Kingmaker, which I understand it's pencils down for the development, and it's onto pre-production.
That's right. It's into it's in yes. It's I don't know what you call it, pre-production. Basically, I've handed over the bits and pieces that I've developed to Gibson's, and they are now getting artwork done. So I think at the moment we've reached a stage where we have a thank you, King's Guild, Kingsman, and Kingmaker. Excellent, as Akrasula says in the chat. So yeah, it's gone to Gibson's, and we have a box cover. Yes, and
when will we see that?
Well, there's going to be a Kickstarter campaign later this year.
When will we see the cover?
Oh, when we see the cover? Well, that's an interesting point because I need to ask Emily at Gibson's, you know, if I can actually start showing the cover around.
Maybe we'll see it in a couple of weeks.
I think we should, but hopefully we'll be able to, because I mean, it's not as if we want to keep a secret or anything. Yeah. And it does look rather splendid, actually, I have to say.
To be fair, in a couple of weeks, we'll probably want a quick chat about Aircon and our plans. And then,
yeah.
But let's move on to brilliant things. What's a little thing which is brilliant? And as always, we can talk about, wee things, but unless you've got something right now, let's talk about why playtesting, and not just playtesting in general, but playtesting the appropriate amount is brilliant.
Why is that brilliant?
Because for me, I mean, you could say, playtest as much as you can, playtest hundreds of times. And that's not actually that useful a thing to do. I think that playtesting the correct amount, you know, if you playtest enough, then the game becomes balanced, it becomes fun to play, it becomes interesting. But if you don't playtest too much, then you're actually able to make other games within your lifetime. You're able to make more than one game within your life. And I think that sometimes understanding that playtests, lots and lots and lots of playtests aren't required, that's part of why, I mean, obviously this isn't finished art or typography, but that's why I'm working on busy bargain bags. And so I can say, you know what, that's basically done enough. That is 95% of the way. And if, you know, this becomes a really big thing, then I'll continue to work on it. But it's like Wibble changed so much. Alphabetical changed so much. Fable changed slightly. Phrasal hasn't changed at all since publication. But, you know, all of the games out of the L deck almost changed within a couple of years just by seeing what's going on. But at the same time, I don't think I would have been able to make those changes pre-publication, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think appropriate playtesting is the brilliant thing. And sometimes we're going to talk about it in detail, obviously, but sometimes we don't need to do much playtesting at all. I mean, that's why I've chosen Mind Meld as one example, because that was, I would say, that was hardly playtested at all by anybody except me. And even then, I didn't playtest it a lot. But we'll go into that in a second. And that was appropriate. Whereas Kingmaker, in contrast, well, I mean, over the past however long it's been, 3 years or so, we've done dozens and dozens and dozens of playtests. Even though each playtest takes at least 2 to 4 hours.
Just another thing to say is that it's not just about the sheer number. It's also about the quality and about actually, you know, a playtest with me observing and me asking appropriate questions and then me pondering this and having people who might be within the target audience or are able to discuss, have that knowledge of the target audience in the case of designers or professionals, that is could be worth 100 playtests where I don't think about it. I mean, remote playtests can be really useful, but it all comes down to, and it sometimes comes down to qualitative versus quantitative data. I mean, if I'm looking for how long does this game take, then obviously the ideal is, yeah, get 1,000 people to play it and tell me a vague estimate of how long it took and average those numbers. Whereas if I'm trying to see whether a card is actually interesting and good for the game or not, and whether I should have 2 copies of this or 3 copies of this, that is something that I need to base on empirical evidence, I think.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Charlie and I started our game designer days, which I know you've been to quite a few of those, over here in Warburg. Well, we actually started them when we were in Nailsworth a long time ago, and that was because there was a demand from a lot of designers to get other designers together and playtest each other's game. So we get quality commentary and analysis. So for example, there we might do an hour of gameplay, and you'd have 2 hours of discussion about what happened. And all of that would be excellent content.
Ian Vincent will probably be able to. I remember when I played Kitty Cataclysm with the expansions, and this was pre-publication of those particular expansions and its special powers, and Ian and Alan spent, you know, a good half hour, 1 hour exploring the possibilities of these things and how it would work. And
because we have a wide variety of different designers, we get some people who are focused very much on the analytical side, like Sebastian Bleaser, who did On the Underground, and Ian Vincent. These are, I mean, Ian Vincent is an operations researcher, so he's very much into the mathematical, the logical, the statistical analysis, and that is so useful if you want to get a balanced deck of cards. I mean, if you were doing a CCG, I would recommend going to seeing Ian Vincent with 100%. It, because that's just his bread and butter. But then again, we also have people who are much more into the human social interaction side of things as well, who can comment on how that works in your game. Great.
And Alex says, having a regular playtesting group, I think, might be one of the most important factors that determines the success of a designer and the design. I think this is really true. If I had not come to London, I don't know if I would have been able to be a full-time designer. I don't think it would have been possible for me. Coming down here, I keep saying that I love the population density, by which I mean it's the results of the population density. The fact that, as a result, if I want to playtest things with people, I will be able to find people who want to do that. I could go to London on board. I could play games if I were willing to travel an hour, you know, every day of the week, basically. I can go dancing. I can do all sorts of things. There are more opportunities that I couldn't if I were still in Glasgow, which is a relatively big city, but it's just a tiny town compared to London, one of the biggest metropolises in the world, which is so useful for me.
On that comment, I would say as long as it's a nice varied group. I mean, I'm currently working with the Ely group, which used to be the Cambridge group, and that's a very varied group. But we have I think there's a pool of probably 8 or 9 people who can come, and you might only get 4 or 5 at one particular session, and that can be quite varied. But if you've got a regular group and it's like only 3 or 4 people, you're likely to get a kind of groupthink, which means that you won't necessarily get the commentary that you need. So a varied group is really, really, really helpful. Varied regular group.
Now, a quick hello to Jess, and obviously, as always, feel free to comment, ask questions, follow. I'm not going to flash up literally everything, but we will start now exploring what we've said that we will explore. So I named 3 factors that the appropriate amount of playtesting will require, will depend upon, and you put a few other things that we might want to consider at the end. So the first thing that I guess it should also be style. So when we talk about complexity, I think it almost goes without saying that the simpler a game, the fewer moving parts, the easier it is to imagine in your head how people are going to play it, the less actual testing it needs.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was going to start by, I mean, it's relevant here. I was going to start by saying that context is everything, I think. And
Alex says, if you name your game, we didn't play test this at all. That sets a very specific set of expectations.
It's interesting because I think sometimes the simplest games, I suppose in a way I would say that the simplest games sometimes are the hardest to design, but perhaps they are the easiest to playtest. I would still say that in order to know that you're hitting the target, if you're going for a mass market simple game, you do need to do a heck of a lot of testing with a very wide group of people. And in a way, the context
that gets into focus testing, right?
Well, and so yes, I think if you're doing a very simple game, which might go, I was thinking like something like In a Bind, Yogi, for example, having a very wide amount of playtest, a lot of playtesting amongst the potential audience there, gives you confidence, gives the production company confidence to go for very large amounts of sales, and knowing that you're going to get large volumes of sales. And
that is definitely an interesting use case because of the way that went, where I had, as someone who doesn't have any connections, this new fresh face on the scene, and I somehow managed to sell almost 3,000 copies. I mean, clearly there was something there, and I was frankly spoiled by how easy it was to sell that game. And it's possible that I might never make a game that's quite as easy to sell again, because you see people doing this from across the room. You don't need to look at the components to be intrigued and ask what they're doing, and you know the rules within like 30 seconds, and you're playing and laughing within a minute. And when I teach the game at a convention, I typically have them playing within about 5 seconds, and it was Dave Cousins who said the way they demonstrated it was just to say people, hey, draw a card, and then they would do it, and they said, okay, draw another card, and then see really how many they can do. Which is, it's all about, anyway, my point is that sure, it does give them confidence, and it did take me a while to arrive at what that game is. And in a recent Twitter thread, I said, okay, there was probably about 1% of the original prototype and maybe 3% or 2% of the second prototype that made it into the final game, because it did come from a very circuitous route from something completely different. But once it was actually, okay, these are the design constraints. It's going to be a deck of cards. It's going to be a bunch of binds a bunch of instructions that people should ideally be able to do all of them at once, in theory, so it's never actually impossible. And they should all be things that are really simple to do. Anyone should be able to do at least one of them. And originally there was head on a knee, which I thought people would be able to do, until I realised that's if you've got to
quite tricky.
I just underestimated that. And then once I'd decided these were the constraints, I actually did a final wording of the cards. And yeah, I'm going to explain. We said that we're going to give, that was one of my test cases anyway. So once I found the instructions, once I worked out, this is what I want to make, I'm going to do the Kickstarter. I'm going to now work out the instructions, and I don't actually need to test this. I didn't bother testing it. At that point, the only thing I tested was the expansions. I skipped testing everything in the basic deck. And it was kind of tested by virtue of me going and testing the expansions on top of that, but it never felt like there's any value in going through the deck so many times. And in theory, in retrospect, if I had, spent another 100 hours doing it, I might have found that one card that was slightly wrong, and I might have found out that second card that now, with 7 years hindsight, it should have been in the sequel. And I would have said, okay, hand on the knee, why is this one particular... And maybe that would have occurred to me. Maybe someone else would have mentioned it, maybe not. I don't know. But I only found that out when I was working on Yogi Guru. And then I was thinking about how to separate that. And then in hindsight, yes, it would be nice if one of the top half body of the cards from Yogi Guru, if one of them were in the original and then hand on the knee were in the sequel, because then that would make it slightly neater, I think.
I'm going to give a contrast. I'm going to give you contrast with that, because I'm going to use my Kingmaker example, and I'm going to come back to context. Context is everything in a slightly different way when I've done this. But with Kingmaker, there's several interesting things that pertain with Kingmaker. Kingmaker is not my design. I'm not the designer. It was designed by Andrew McNeil, and I'm the developer. I see myself as the developer for that. Interestingly, that means that when I make changes, I want to be convinced that those changes are going to meet that kind of almost indefinable essence of Kingmaker that Andrew McNeil had in his original design.
It has to be true to the vision.
Yes. So, and this is a game. This is a game which traditionally in the old days used to take 4 to 6 hours. Sometimes you might even get a stalemate. So playtesting a whole game of Kingmaker is not a trivial undertaking. And then, because when we started playtesting, we very quickly had lockdowns, then it meant putting it all online, doing playtesting online, which means you've got the additional overhead of tech problems. So here for this, I'm seeing this is a complex game. I want to be sure that the potential buyers of that game, who are many, a lot of them are Americans, actually. Although it's a Wars of the Roses English game, the Americans really love that kind of thing. So there's quite a wide variety of audience. There's tournament players, there's relatively casual players, there's hardcore war gamers. So it's a very big audience. So I wanted to make sure we got a lot of play testing of the revised Kingmaker version, so that we could make sure that a lot of the fundamental changes that we're making to the physical representations and the variations that we were introducing to the actual mechanics, that they were going to work for the whole of that wide audience. Because the one thing I didn't want to happen was to produce something kind of half-cocked that a significant proportion of the audience wouldn't actually go for, because it's got a huge audience. So bizarrely,
some people who are disgruntled and some people are unhappy.
But so bizarrely, that game I mean, I've been writing the credits, Kingmaker credits for this, so I'm going back reviewing all of the playtesting we've done. So we started in November 2019, and face to face, but by the time we did a few in 2019, late 2019, but then I was doing the actual revisions. I'm actually making the newly developed version, and so by the time we started doing the playtesting of the revised Kingmaker, we were almost into lockdown, and then lockdown came along. But since then, we've done between 50 and 100 playtests. So I personally have actually managed somewhere around 60 full playtests, and this is a game which is solo 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 players. So we have to do a lot of playtests because it has to work for different numbers of players as well. So we've done,
and each of these playtests are observed directly by you.
Each of those they're observed. I've taken part in some of them, or they've been observed by me. We have done some blind testing as well through various means. As one of my rules reviewers who's doing this did a vassal module for it. So which I haven't actually played a lot myself. So a very, very wide and deep amount of playtesting. So it's something like I've probably done something in the order of 150 hours personally of observation or actual playing with other people, and that's apart from my own playtesting, which I do solo, to make sure that mechanics are working before I release it, and that doesn't include the amount of time it takes to organize the playtesting either. So each playtest has probably taken 2 to 3 hours to organize and debrief from, apart from the 3 hours of playing. So, but I felt that for something like Kingmaker, which is a complex game with a massive track record going back to 1974, several editions already, I felt that the context of that for me is we have to do one heck of a lot of playtesting to make sure that what we've got is correct. Now, I think that Bez and I are both right, so that some games you don't need to do much, and some games you need to do a lot. And I think there's a useful German term for this called Fingerspitzengefühl. Now, what that actually means
Fingerspitzengefühl.
Fingerspitzengefühl. It means fingertip feeling. So it means you have a special sense of what is the correct, in this case, what is the correct amount of playtesting, and that comes. I was going to say that comes from experience. It's not quite the same. That comes from your own appreciation.
Basically mean intuition.
It's not quite intuition, but it's using your understanding of your circumstances and your knowledge of the task that you're doing. It's like it's like a craft feel. It's like a potter, I think, knowing this is the right shape I want for this particular pot, and it's partly instinctive, but it's also derived from your understanding of the technique that you're using, and I think that's quite a helpful explanation or way of describing what we're aiming at here. So an experienced game designer will have that Fingerspitzengefühl, if you like, about an appropriate amount of playtesting, which is why I said context is everything. Because my contrast is the game Mind Meld, which I did way back. It was printed. It was published in Imagine magazine. I've got a copy of it here.
And before we go on, just talking about the designer's experience, I think that again, as you are a more experienced designer, not only do you get a sense of how much playtesting is appropriate, but also the amount of playtesting you need might be reduced, because you do develop a better sense of understanding how things have to work together mathematically. And certainly in a highly strategic, competitive game, some of the things you do want to, you want to make sure it feels good. That's the most important thing. And arguably, you don't want perfect balance. You do want some things that seem to be choices that later on they're clearly not decisions you would ever consider. That's a lovely thing in games, when you become better and you're able to discount stuff. And you don't want necessarily to have a super meaningful choice every single turn. You want a bit of variation that's appropriate to the audience.
And
But
it needs, and often you need to rise to a crescendo as well. So it's that.
Or on the other hand, maybe it's a case of, in some games, you have a diminishing decision space. Like Go, I mean, on the second turn, you're having as many decisions as you will ever have. Whereas quite often those games get abandoned. Go games, professionally, most people never play them to the end, because at a certain point they realize, okay, yes, we've played enough that I know you're going to win, and there's little enough that I can do it.
Yes, true.
I
liked it in the comments. Aquasulis has got a good one, which is, when you know, you know. I think that's exactly it.
It's less like baking, which is more scientific, more like general cooking, where you can play around with things and feel it around a bit. Maybe like stir frying or putting things in a pan. Maybe a stew, because a stew, actually, you can season it along the way. Maybe a stew is a better analogy.
It links back to good old a la carte. The one that I wanted to contrast, this game here, which is my Mind Meld game. That's the board published in Imagine Magazine. You can't really see that. This is a solitaire game where the scenario is you're kind of monks, and you are trying to repel people creatures who are attacking the central point of your monastery there. And so you've got those radiating hexes from the center, and those, you can just about see the tracks. They're dotted tracks, and those are the tracks of the creatures that are attacking. And this game was built on the rule of 3, if you like. There are 3 different types of creatures. They in this particular version, there were wolves, which move quickly, ogres, which are kind of medium paced, and then the worm, which moves slowly. But the strength is also, wolves are weak, relatively weak, ogres are kind of medium strength, and worms are very powerful. And your monks, an individual, you have several monks, I can't remember how many, you have a bunch of monks who are kind of repelling these creatures. One monk can repel a wolf, but you need, in this case, a stack of 2 monks to repel an ogre, and you need a stack of 4 to repel a worm, right? So the whole game was built around, how do you combine your monks in order to defeat these creatures who are all just programmed coming towards you in the solo game. So it's just a bot which is sending these creatures from 6 different directions, and you have to maneuver your guys in the appropriate ways to defeat the creatures. If a creature ever reaches the middle, you lose, right?
And these are worms that are
giant. Dragons. Oh yes, they're worms. WYRM. Proper giant worms. Dragon worms, if you like. Yes. So the way this was balanced was that each round, at the start of the game, each round you get 3 creatures, and they're randomly determined where they come on. And if you win with 3 creatures per round, then the next game you do 4 creatures a round. And if you win with 4, you then get 5 creatures a round. So in this particular case, balance wasn't that important. I wasn't trying to say what's a challenging game, because it will eventually be challenging, because eventually you're going to find at some level of things coming at you, you're going to find it incredibly difficult to win. So it's interesting, because once I designed, this took me about 48 hours to design. It's one of those very rare games where virtually nothing changed. After about 48 hours, I had the game. Obviously, I had to write the rules, which took rather longer. And it was a published game with, I would say, very little playtesting. Really, I mean, I playtested it probably half a dozen times or so, and nobody else playtested it at all, I think. And it was published in Imagine magazine in May 1985. As you can see,
And
it's quite an old
was
game.
there any reception to that? Do you know what people thought about it?
I think people were quite happy. The trouble is, being a magazine game, it requires people to print out the stuff and cut out the pieces. So it's always quite difficult to see how appreciative people were. But I had no bad reactions and quite a lot of good reactions from that. And this was back in 1985, so there weren't a lot of games around, and not a lot of solo games either. So yeah, I was very pleased with that particular offering. It came out quite well. Since then, Tony Boydell and I, we kind of played around with the concept, and we kind of rethemed it as a kind of circus theme with circus animals waking the ringmaster in the middle, and we kind of tried to get that taken on by other companies, but that's getting away from the playtesting of it, and when you were retheming it, we did have to do a little bit more playtesting to make sure that the theming worked. But I think in that, as I was saying, that Fingerspitzengefühl thing, I figured that was enough playtesting to see that the thing was working, and it didn't require a lot of balancing, so it didn't really require a lot of playtesting.
I am aware that we're coming up to the hour, but let's get a little bit specific. Let's talk about why specifically for this game did you need less playtesting? Was it the number of moving parts? Was it the fact that it was solo? What can you say about it?
It had a strong central mechanic. Only one required central mechanic. So everything fitted together really, really well. So the number of cogs was relatively small. It didn't require. I think the important thing was it didn't really require balancing, because you were starting you're starting at an easy level, and it was automatically ratcheting up. So it didn't require a lot of balancing, and so I felt that for those main reasons it didn't require a lot of playtesting. It was there. It was kind of like finished. It was like one of those rare things where it's a finished concept and really fairly easy to implement. I'd say it's very similar to I wasn't going to use it as an example, but my March of Progress game. The original base scenario for March of Progress was a very easy thing to design. The playtesting of March of Progress was playtesting the additional scenarios, which gave it more depth. Whereas Mindmeld was always intended to be a kind of quick and dirty kind of magazine type game, not
one thing is what's the payoff, frankly. I mean, from a cross financial and costs of your effort points of view, I was lucky enough to have a couple of my games in Tabletop Gaming magazine, which was quite nice. And those were games that we'd played a few times online, and that was it. I mean, the playtesting was basically as a result of us wanting to play it during COVID times. And it worked well with video chats, which obviously made it quite nice for when it was published. But I'm sure it would work well in person. But a game about wee whimsical creatures and trying to identify them after someone makes noises, I literally never played that in person until UK Games Expo. So I'd played it online. There wasn't any reason why it wouldn't work, but if you look at the original instructions, where I think it says 4 to 10-ish in the original copies, of which 50 were printed, but in the second edition, of which 1,000 were printed, it says 4 to 8-ish, because during UK Games Expo, I finally got a big group together, which of course is very difficult, because hey, COVID.
Indeed.
And it's also about opportunity. How much effort is it to do this? And sometimes, yes, it comes to that point where games are never finished. And I'll let you talk about your third thing, but just to rush through my couple of other examples, Kitty Cataclysm, it is super simple. you've got a bunch of cards, you play the card, you do what it says. So it might say steal, you take from other people, donate, you have cards you give them to others. You have cards where you donate everything, you draw 5, that allows you to essentially reset your hand. You have cards that you punish other people for having 6 or 7. It took me, I would say, about a year to get the basics of the game, to get the design right. And then it took me a few more months to get the cards broadly right. And since publication, Antoinette Mason made a few points, and actually, based on Antoinette Mason and further discussions with David Brain, I think that 3 of them will be changed. So that basically means moving one number up or down 1, or making a duplicate of one card and removing a duplicate of another card. So very minor things. But getting to that final point of, okay, what is interesting? What cards are required? What cards are balanced? That was a case of, at that point, having people who, I know you say to avoid groupthink, but having people who have played the game before, who can just play it 10 times within an hour, because it is a super quick game, and then at the end of that hour say, okay, given this version, whatever it is, I'm not good at numbering my versions and keeping track, but given this version, what do we think there should be more of? What do we think should be cheaper? What do we think should be more expensive? And then next week I would come with a completely redrawn deck, and that went through, maybe 100 iterations, or 100, not iterations, 100 playtests, each playtest being like 10, 12 games in one sitting. And that's allowed us to really drill into it. And I think the key thing is that even though Rob Harper has said, well, it's so chaotic, it doesn't really matter. And that's kind of true. But I think the entire game, as far as I'm concerned, it was always meant to be about, you've got just enough ability to work out what to do, and all the cards are useful sometimes, but it's, again, contextual on what's in your hand. And yes, you can have a game where you have 2 perfect cards, one of which there's one of in the deck, one of which I think there's like 2 of. So there's a reasonable chance of that happening if you keep playing it. One time you will get the perfect hand, and if you've played the game enough, you will be able to realize, hey, wait, if I've got other good cards in my hands, I can probably win on my first turn without anyone else getting a go. But it takes about 30 seconds to reshuffle and redeal. And
exactly. I think with a shorter game like that, you've got the possibility to address some of those conceptual questions, so that with Kitty Cataclysm, because it's a very short game. I know it's easy to say, well, people won't mind if it's over very quickly, but also you can do a lot of iterations and make sure that there is actual player agency in there. It's much more difficult with a longer game. I mean, my third example was the War of the Three Sanchos, which is another one of our Pocket Campaigns games, which Dave Mortimer's designed. Now we've been playtesting that a lot, and really that game has got the kind of fundamental things you get in a lot of larger published games, which is basically, it needs to be balanced. So it needs to be balanced for 2-player and for 3-player. So that there's a lot of playtesting to make sure that works. And we've got the 3 Sanchos, which is Castile, Navarre, and Aragon. And we want to make sure that ideally you could play any two of those, and they're slightly asymmetrical. So we do have, if you've got asymmetrical players, you have to do a lot of playtesting to make sure that one isn't overpowered. So that requires more playtesting. There's the whole does it work thing. So because of the central mechanic of the game, which is you have a single card which you play, and each player takes an action off that card. So we have to make sure that does that mechanism work well and give people good
of content, and there's a lot of what you might call knobbiness, and lots of little knobs to twiddle.
Yes, exactly.
And a lot of things that you have to consider that actually have a big ramification on the game. Because
could I just
going to see all these cards probably.
Could I mention one other thing as well? So it's not only about that balance. Does it work? Are there good decisions to make? But in our, as a publisher, I'm also addressing, can it actually be published within the cost, within the price band that we want, the cost and price band? So the physical representation of this. I mean, at the moment, we've revised this. This is the current board, which is the same size as the board for Ming Voyages. So it's a prototype board. So those spaces in there, each area has to contain quite a lot, can contain quite a lot of pieces. So we have to make sure that physical representation is playable easily by the players. So we initially started with a board which was double this size. But the trouble is, having a double-sized board meant it was too expensive to produce.
And so you're testing not only the rules and the text and the content of the cards, but you're also yes, you're testing the tactile ability of people to move pieces around. Seeing, are these pieces usable, fit for purpose?
Yeah. So we're testing within the design constraints of our Pocket Campaign series. And one of the design constraints we have, just a quick mention of that, is is that we like to have large cards. So we're using 75mm by 105mm cards, which are in fact they are. I mean, you might not be able to get the actual. Oops, you might not be able to get the actual size.
And again, this is all prototype, obviously.
They're big. They're big cards. We have relatively small. You have relatively small.
Do you have a normal size poker card beside you?
I don't. The trouble is, I tend to only use. Oh, I've got them. This is one of our Kingmaker ones. It's doesn't really show. Yeah, it's significantly bigger than those. But that's a kind of signature design constraint we have for Pocket Campaign. So we've got the opportunity to give really good artwork on the cards, so that the cards are really nice to look at and handle. And that's very important, which means that that constrains our costs. So it means we can't cut costs by having small cards. We have to,
because that's what you've decided for this particular line.
Yes.
That Pocket Campaigns come in a small box, but they have big cards.
Yeah. So what we did with what we're doing in playtesting is deciding how to reduce the cost. So we now know that the smaller size board works fine, absolutely fine. We don't need the big board, which I thought we originally might have needed. And also we can not make do. The game works well with a 27 card deck. And what we've done is we've packed the solo and the 2 and the 3 player games into one deck of 27 cards, because previously we had 2 decks. We had a separate deck for solo, which meant we were actually having 54 cards, which takes us out of the price bracket we want. So it's play testing that those physical representations are very important for production. So that's why you'll often find that once you've designed a game, you give it to a publisher, they come out with something you didn't quite expect. That's largely because they'll be looking at cost and price points and trying to modify things to make them fit. And if I know, I was with Brett Gilbert in Ely a couple of weeks ago, and he had just had one of his games delivered, and there was some really, I mean, he hadn't seen what they were going to do with the final game, and in that game, because it was kickstarted, there were some interesting decisions they made and what to include in the game. So there was a neoprene playmat included in the game, which wasn't in their original design at all, because it doesn't actually need a neoprene playmat, because all you're putting on the mat is a row of 5 cards or tiles.
Okay.
You can just put them on the table, but because they were producing a deluxe version for Kickstarter, they decided, oh, let's have this wonderful, expensive neoprene mat, which of course makes it a deluxe game, and the player experience is better. And there's an expectation, isn't there, with Kickstarter, that you'll get higher quality components, and that's fine. They are, the playmats are all the rage. That is absolutely.
It is a weird one. I think so. We've talked about the complexity of the game. We've talked about the designer's experience. I think it's important to talk about the fragility of the game and also how much the players bring to the game, which is a big thing. because I want to quickly compare two of my unpublished games that will hopefully be published. Certainly in a small print run of 100, which is what my new model is. So this is the game I mentioned earlier, a game about judging which object best matches three criteria. For example, something you saw recently, fruity and smelly. And you've got 7 things, and everyone needs to quickly grab one. And I would say, okay, a sheep, I would have probably grabbed a curry if both of these were on the table, because a curry is lots easier to say, well, there's often mango. And curries are often quite smelly. If your neighbors are cooking them, quite often you can smell it. And I promise you that I've got a bunch of tinned curries in my cupboard. And so I saw that when I opened the cupboard yesterday. And yeah, something like that. And then the judge selects. That game, look, I'm probably never going to actually test the final cards because if curry, I mean, curry's actually a pretty good card. I'm probably not going to. Let's say tomato is changed for blueberry. Does that change the game? Not really. I mean, but let's say I probably wouldn't do that because it's red and I want a certain amount of red. You get the points. Like if someone inspires a funny card, if there's a funny criteria, I need, now that I've playtested it enough times to understand what's going on in the game, the joy of it is what people bring to the game. I need to have items that are generally positive. There needs to be a positivity. I wouldn't have rubbish, or it needs to be physical. I wouldn't have a smile. I need to have something. Most of them need to be something that a child would understand. But if there's an occasional one like a monocle, which a child might not know, that's okay, as long as there's a small amount. And I need to keep the longer things that are multiple words to be a certain small percentage of the deck. Given that
what you're doing there, Bez, is a really good illustration of Fingerspitzengefühl, you see. At the design stage, you're using that intimate knowledge of the context in which you're doing the design to know that you don't need to playtest this a lot, or indeed necessarily at all. You can use for example, if you're getting towards publication and you think, oh, that card just is slightly wrong, could be improved by this, you can make that change, and then you can decide, because you know the context of that change, you can decide not to playtest. Now that.
Whereas
you have to have you can have the content, the confidence to do that. It's much more, obviously there is a danger. There is a danger if you haven't, if a publisher does it and they haven't got that Fingerspitzengefühl, they may make a change which just doesn't work. There was one game I heard of, I can't remember the name of the game, that a publisher produced where they decided they didn't need that many cards in the deck, and so they took like a third of the cards out. Now, the problem with that kind of radical change to the game, even if you've got multiple cards, it feels like, well, we've got multiple cards. We just take some of the multiples out. It's not a problem. What could possibly go wrong? And then they found that, of course, the game length was dependent on the card deck size. So they actually broke the game, not realizing that change. So they exhibited a lack of Fingerspitzengefühl and made a change, which was a terrible idea. And they didn't playtest it because it was too late for
and the other game that I want to talk about is a game about selecting 7 cards speedily, 2 at a time, hoping they synergize. So I don't, and really annoyingly, I had a prototype and I lost it just over a week ago. I think when I went to London on board, I might have lost an entire box which had that game in, which is a bit annoying, and also a copy of Eldec and Kitty Cataclysm, which is marginally annoying, but not really a big deal because I can just open up another one. But yeah, in that game, it's inspired by fantasy realms and games where you draft cards, and then the cards say things like, the Monocle Maker gives you an extra point for each creature with an eye. Or the Hungry Horatio gives you points for each cake that you have, and also a point for each food card. And the cook gives you points if you've got this and this, you get this many points.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And as I've played it, I've learned better what the requirements are, because I've learned that cards need at least 4 aspects that can be used by other cards, and it's not too overloading because these can be integrated as symbols within the artwork. For example, the ones which are requiring legs or arms, that's easy to have. Some need music, and there's little musical notes which are really easy to put into a drawing, where until you actually need it, you can just ignore it. It's not like text where you feel obligated to read it, if you know what I mean. I do want it to be a slow speed game, because you have to take like a good 10 seconds to actually read the cards when they're flipped over before speedily deciding which one to grab. But in that game, even though all the cards are unique, it feels like tweaking one is going to require a lot more testing, to the point where I am actually tempted, because I could see this being an infinite issue where I get closer and closer to what I consider a good deck, but releasing something that I call version 0.9. And with that, illustrate the point that where, yeah, this is kind of a preview. I'm only printing 100 of these, and if you like it enough, if you feel like this is good enough, then it's good enough that you can play it 10 times, lots of times. But if it were to be taken to a tournament, because it is the kind of game that I imagine could be played hundreds of times, hopefully, by people, if it works well, then maybe within the next year I might release version 1, and kind of making that obvious. And I know that sounds like a really weird business model, but that's kind of me moving into what alpha on Steam, if you know what I mean, and doing that in a very small production, and But then you've got Magic the Gathering, where if one of the cards are overpowered in my game, okay, the person who snaps it up first wins. But Magic the Gathering is more than just drafting. Magic the Gathering is also constructed, so if there's one card that's clearly overpowered, then everyone's going to select that one card, go for that style of deck, and it will warp the entire metagame.
Yeah. So are you saying in effect that really you need more playtesting if there's a lot of interaction of components?
I think what I'm saying is you need more playtesting if a mistake is going, or
I was going to say, if it has its interaction,
bigger impact on the game.
It's interaction of components. If those interactions are going to have an impact on the play context, and that's the key. So if it's a, I'll just go back to Kitty Cataclysm. There is interaction. Obviously, it's interaction of components, and some of them will have a big impact, and in fact could lead to somebody winning straight away. But if it's a very short game, that doesn't matter so much. If it was a game of Magic the Gathering, which is a tournament-based game, then that would be absolutely terrible from a design perspective, and you have to playtest to find that out. So the play context, it's not just the context of design, it's actually the play context as well.
Like, how seriously are people going to play this? And also how you present it. Because Nicholas says it's like early access for analog game. And I think this is the key thing, where, you know, hand-to-hand wombats, they have you seen hand-to-hand wombat, this Kickstarter?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's the latest thing by Exploding Kittens. I played it at London Toy Fair. It's a really good, it's a dexterity social deduction game. So everyone's trying to build up towers, except for a minority of players who are trying to knock the towers over. Everyone's got their eye closed, but you try to work out who was the person taking things off the towers or putting them in the wrong way. And then you have a discussion, you try to out people, and that's basically to get you on. Know 90% of the game. Within that, they had a pledge level where you can pay extra to get a prototype version as well as the final version. So you can't pledge just for the prototype version, but what they say is, we will give you, as soon as the Kickstarter ends, we will ship you the prototype version with typos, with designer artwork, with you know,
That's
all
interesting.
the extra special roles, because
Yep.
obviously social deduction, we want to have
Yeah, sure.
advanced roles that you can think that we thought are reasonably good, but we want to get your inputs. We want to know which of these work best if
Right.
other people have other ideas.
That's a very interesting way
And
of
then
doing it.
6 months
Yes.
later, they're going to send the game into production.
Oh, right. So,
And then,
so have they said then that production will be influenced by what people say?
yes, 100%.
Wow.
It
Okay.
will be influenced by it.
Okay. Oh, right. That's good.
I've talked to the people, and they were on Board Game Design Lab, and they are very big on making sure that it's not finished and saying, yes, we are open to suggestions. We are doing this genuinely.
That's like a beta software release model. So you expect, or even an alpha release model. So you're expecting to have, you're building in changes. That's
and the interesting thing is that they clearly have enough of a fan base where some people are saying, yes, I want to play this as soon as possible. And also yes, I want to be able to influence the design and possibly have, you know, maybe someone comes up with a really good idea. Chances are maybe one of the people will actually get something that they can point to and say, that was me. But realistically, it is going to influence the card counts and some small minor things like that, and what they suggest. And I think this is a really interesting thing, and that does. I think when I was putting up digital games onto Newgrounds back in the day, I was very big on just saying, you know what, I don't know if this is very good. I'm going to stop here and say this is version 0.3. I've made like one level of it. If people like it, I will keep working on it. If people don't like it, then I'll stop, because it's clearly not enough to be a finished game. And this is about 1/3 of my actual intention. And sometimes I would do multiple things. Sometimes I would stop at that point but I think that experimentation matters, and certainly in the context of a busy bargain bag, if it's for £5, I write on the thing version 0.9 in big letters, I don't think that's unreasonable.
No, I think that's a good model. It is a different model from
pretty much everyone else.
Pretty much everyone else, yes. But it's a good model, and I mean, like I said, as I think I've said over and over again, it's context is everything. If you're doing a more traditional, big box Euro game, you're probably not going to take that approach, because you want to be able to release something which people know is a coherent, self-standing, well thought through thing which will play out of the box. So in a sense, what you're saying is
it's costing like 50 quid.
Exactly.
So if you send out a prototype, that's not going well. To be fair, with Exploding Kittens, it is for a small publisher. It is a full production run. They're printing 1,000 copies. But bear in mind, these are chunky plastic components, so it's probably still going to be quite expensive for them when they're only doing 1,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's not an approach we could take with Kingmaker, for example, because to make a Kingmaker prototype probably takes me a day, and costs quite a lot, because there's I don't know, 300 cards or whatever in it. So I mean, it's quite expensive to make. I've made about 6.
And there isn't
copies, I think, over the
number of people. I mean, Kingmaker is a more niche game. You're probably not going to get, if you could get 1,000 people who said, yes, I want an early access copy of
Kingmaker. I'm not going to get 1,000 people saying that. No,
if you could, then I think it would be viable.
If I could easily get 50, but yeah, which would be not.
But then the print on demand costs
would be horrible.
Would people be willing to pay that? Probably not.
No, not really.
But so we've talked about everything. I think the complexity, designer's experience, the fragility of the game. So yes, how much one change matters. How important is it that the game is balanced? Again, as you said, Alan, it is all contextual. Is it going to be played in a tournament setting? Like if players change the game a lot, then I think that it matters less to playtest it. Like RPGs, because playtesting gives you, in theory, less information because of the amount that one group will change it based on the other. yes, you do get information, but it feels less, and so you have to almost abstract away the individual decisions and creativity of those players, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think with RPGs are different. Yeah, you may not need because RPGs because they're relying so much on player input to actually create the experience that you're doing a framework. It's very different, and very often a playtest of an RPG may actually not reflect normal, if I can put it that way, normal RPG play. It may be that it's a very particular experience each time, so it's much more difficult. Yeah, it's a different experience. CCGs would require a hell of a lot of playtesting because with those you have to make sure if you're doing a
Because
big
you can
CCG,
actually make your own deck, so you can because the players are designing the deck, there's more fragility, I would say.
Yeah, the interaction of components is absolutely vital for the actual play experience, and if there's a perception of it being broken, it can wreck the whole brand. So you have to be very careful with that kind of thing. And playtesting, mass playtesting is one. I think that's another thing that it's if you've got a family game too, you need to do a lot of playtesting to make sure that it's robust. That's it. So the audience can make that work or not. War games is a particular one. If you've got a miniatures war games game, in the old days, they didn't have to be robust because people would use the war game rules as a kind of framework, and they'd quickly have their own homegrown variants. And Kingmaker, to an extent, suffered a bit from that, in that things were lacking in clarity because war game rules often lacked clarity, and therefore you had house rules to cover those points, and people weren't too worried about that.
Address house rules and all that in another show.
I think we should
to address what's going on in the banner. Before the show, you said, "Are there good decision points?" And I would kind of want to expand that to say, not every game like this one does. It's not about well, I guess there is the key decision points of which one of these you grab, but Yogi, I don't consider whether you touch your nose with your right hand or which finger you use to be a decision point as such, even though it kind of is, but that's not the point of the game. And so it's, are there good decision points, or is there enough feeling of agency for the context of the game? And that was the thing that surprised me, that astonished me, that even the Fast and Furious flip a card, do what it says, that enough agency just to be, and there is this entire genre of essentially zero decision games like Jungle Speed, Twin It, and Yogi, where it's not about what you do, it's about can you do it.
It's about can you do it or how you do it. I mean, contrast Snakes and Ladders, where you haven't got any decisions, or Ludo, where you really haven't got any decisions. Now that there's not a playtesting issue there. There's more a question: is that actually what we would describe as a game? And I don't want to go down that route, but it's agency. I think we are dealing with. I was meaning decision points in terms of agency.
Enough agency for the. It's, as you say. I think as we wrap up, that is the biggest thing. It is all. Sorry, I've got so bad blocked nose. It is all contextual. Let's wrap up, and I am going to, like usual, try to think of a question of the day. Question of the day. Let's ask everyone a question before we go on our way. And so I am going to ask, everyone, specifically about what I said about a game about selecting 7 cards speedily, 2 at a time, hoping they synergize. Is that something that you would, if I said, this is version 0.9, it's not fully done, but I think it's good enough for at least playing, for a few evenings, and it probably won't break, but if I ever do another version, there will almost certainly be changes. Is that something that you would, how would you feel about that? Like, would you buy that in that context? Again, bearing in mind it's a £5 bag of a deck of cards. Is that assuming you're interested in a game about selecting 7 cards speedily 2 at a time, hoping they synergize. If you're interested in that theme, would that turn you off? Is that something that you would enjoy? Yeah, let me know. What are your thoughts on that? And Alan, do you have a question? It's okay if you don't.
I don't really have a question.
Okay, so to answer my question, Alan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a bit like that Voyages game that Matt
and Rory made.
It's talking about a low cost, well, from my perspective at least, a low cost item, which is fun, and in a sense, why wouldn't you engage in that? I mean, I would just caveat with that with saying, knowing the quality of the designer is very important. And so with Matt and Rory, that looks like a fun idea. They're doing it. It's brand quality. So I would say yes. I would definitely go for something like that. And it is partly because you would do it. If it was someone I didn't know, would I want to waste my time on it? And I don't necessarily think so. I think so you have a track record of doing things like that, which are fun. So yeah, go for it. That's what I would say.
Okay. And Josie, I'm slightly confused by your comments. I feel Alan's question should be kind. And Nicholas answers my question saying, I reckon that most people would be used to that kind of early access if it includes giving feedback, being something that gives them access to the finished game later on as a bonus for jumping in early on. It should be expected that the 1.0 version does come out as well. See, Josie feels that your question, if you had one, should be king related. It's like, what's your favorite king?
It's interesting because the game. Oh, I'm wearing this T-shirt, which is my Tara Seat of Kings T-shirt.
Oh wow, another king!
Yeah, I know, a king. So I've got Tara Seat of Kings, which actually was originally called King of the Castle. So I may have king stuff on the brain in my design. Although Confucius didn't have kings because the Chinese didn't call them kings. Yeah.
I think this is really sorry about that. Yeah, digitally, I mean, early access has been established on Steam, where you pay, you get the thing that's being made, but you've paid your lot. You've paid basically full price, but you get, well, sometimes it's a reduced price, but you might even pay full price. You get early access, but you will get the game when it comes out for free. That is kind of what's going on there with Steam. But that's not possible with board games, because frankly, the £5 deck, I'm not entirely, like, I guess I could, in theory, have a minor thing where it says, yes, if you send in like a certain quality, a number of feedback forms to me, and which maybe you can do that digitally, you get a 10 or even 20% discount, and 20% would be basically selling it at pretty much at cost at that point, because I don't get much. And the thing is, like, if I don't get feedback, if there isn't the interest, then version 1.0 might not come out. But yeah, it's a really interesting question of how to negotiate that, because obviously when there's a physical deliverable, I can't say, hey, here you go, have this for free. I'm still going to have to charge people. But I could imagine potentially having a model where this is the early access, and that does give you, I mean, no one's going to buy it because it reduces it to £4. But if I say, yes, you can buy as many copies as you want at £4 rather than the £5, as long as you've given me a certain amount of feedback on this early version, and you've, like, that could work potentially if I'm really, if I'm good at working out what feedback I actually need for it. But then again, that's on me to work out what the questions that I should be asking are. And maybe just seeing the game states at the end would actually be, yes, tell me what the 7 cards that everyone picked and which are the cards that got rejected, I guess, could be useful, just so I can work out roughly what the game state is and what people are prioritizing, and that could be useful. But no, it does. Anyway, I'm still interested in things about that. Over to you. What are you up to? You can share, but only if you want to. So, what are you up to now? I am going to send a package to Josie. Lots of games coming your way. Please earn them, and I look forward to seeing you at Aircon, or rather 2 nights before Aircon, I should say. And I am going to. I decided yesterday that I'm not going to just take off most of yesterday, but also most of today. I'm going to buy myself some milk and have some simple food, and again spend a good chunk of the day sleeping and doing not too much, if I'm being honest. Like maybe some reading, but I'm just feeling still pretty run down. I was going to go to Bastion, but I've decided against it just because it's hopefully I'll be up. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to go to Mambo and Cha-Cha-Cha, which is really, really sad because it's the final week and the most exciting week, because they each month is like a self-contained course, if you know what I mean. And
right,
so
yes.
if you skip the final week, then you don't get to advance to the next level, and also you have to do the same 3 weeks that you've already done, which is level week. Week 1 is kind of the most boring week, but the odd week 2 is okay because then you actually start to get to the spinning and stuff. Anyway, what are you up to?
Well, I'm rewriting the rules for War of the Three Sanchos in the light of the changes we've made recently, so that we can then play test more. So that's one thing I'm going to be doing. Also, I should have said in the highlights, of course, that we've actually had our reprints of Ming Voyages and the Cousins War, and we've just sent out the pre-orders for the Cousins War. So
congratulations!
That is actually quite exciting. Second printing, Cousins War second printing, which is nice. So if anyone wants a copy of that, we have loads. It's our first. That was our first Pocket Campaigns game, and it is now out again, which is good. I'm really relieved. It's taken ages to get that done because of Brexit and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to selling more of those. I've got this. I was talking to Charlie about this little problem I've got. I keep deflecting myself from things to do other interesting things that I want to do, which I'm sure a lot of people do. And I'm currently I currently want to write something about German doctrine in 1944 Normandy, which requires a lot of research and stuff. And I keep finding it interesting and reading more and more stuff about it, which deflects me from these important things like writing rules for games I'm going to publish. So my question is, how do I get focus on things I'm really supposed to do? That's my question.
But that's more of a personal search than something you're actually wanting.
Yes, it is really.
And so at this point, I'm going to recap and wrap up before we finish up. So we talked about quite a bit today. We started talking about recent highlights, about me being unwell, about Alan wrapping up things, and King's Guild, I think it was called.
Yes.
That 5-4 brought and introduced you all to, and you played a couple of rounds and you decided to keep playing. We talked a wee bit about how people make all sorts of different weights of games, like Karl-Heinz Schmiel, and of course yourself doing different things, and myself doing Seize the Power, and Vlada, doing all sorts of. I think people, once they get into games, they just want to try out making different things to contribute to it. I think there's that sort of appeal. We talked about exactly how you went through the playtesting process of Kingmaker, of Mind Meld, just solo testing it 6 times and making it over the course of 48 hours. Magazine games in general, there being an opportunity cost, and maybe it's worth you getting that out there. It's good enough, people will enjoy it, but you don't need to keep playtesting it over and over and over indefinitely, because sure, it might be useful, but there is certainly diminishing returns. It's up to the designer to know when that is maybe best stopped. We talked about the complexity, whether it's something super simple that you can imagine in your head, or something with a lot of moving parts. About the context, which was a really interesting thing that I hadn't considered before this conversation, whether it's a tournament setting that gets played for large amounts of money, like Magic the Gathering, or whether it's something that you write on the box, it's version 0.9. Well, there won't even be a box. When you write on the first cards in the deck, it's version 0.9. When it depends on the fragility of the game, whether that one card that you've not quite tested as much as everything else, is that going to come up in every game? Is it a card that people will be able to build a deck around? Is it a card that you probably won't see? We talked about, yes, the designer's experience, and we talked about the Fingerspitzengefühl.
Excellent. Fingerspitzengefühl, yes.
Yes. And we also talked about, yes, sometimes it's more important that the game is balanced. Sometimes it's about, frankly, the game is more of a framework. And yes, I do like this, but it is more of a framework for people to be creative. And if this game fails, it's not going to be because I chose Old Sock. Well, actually, Old Socks is, now I've realized, a bad card. I'm trying to eliminate all adjectives from the front of the cards. It would just be socks. So it's not going to be because I chose socks rather than Fica plant. And it's not going to be because of that decision. If the game fails, it's probably for a particular play group, it's going to be because they don't enjoy the creative process of trying to match free adjectives to whatever's on the front of the card, and explaining why socks can be healthy to keep on your feet. They can be pretty. And, sometimes when they're tumbling around in the washing machine, they're pretty noisy. And trying to stretch the things like that, it's going to come down, and it's the relative importance. We talked a little bit about testing different things, like in the case of the free Sanchos, seeing whether a reduced size board works, and having more tokens in a reduced space, and it still works, so that can reduce cost. But these things do need to be tested for usability. Yeah, that was a really good discussion, and I asked whether people would buy, as Nicholas puts it, an early access thing, and I think that Nicholas's point is, yes, people might expect that there's definitely a version 1.0, so maybe I should just write on the thing, hey, there might or there might not be a version 1.0, and making it super clear. And it's just another expectation to manage. It doesn't mean that I have to go along with every single expectation, but just that we need to be aware of all these expectations. And things to look forward to. Josie is organising volunteers to teach the games to. Thank you very much. I'm excited to hear that, and I will send it out first class. And do you have anything else that you would like to say at this point?
Well, I'm glad we kept to the hour, Bez. I think that was very important to be kept to the hour. So that was a bit of that was a definite success.
That was unfortunate. There were halfway through, I was thinking, should this be a two-parter? And after Aircon, maybe in future we will make things a two-parter. We'll see what happens.
Maybe, yeah, we can be flexible.
Let me firstly, if you want to check out me, I am Stuff by Bez everywhere. So that is stuffbybez.com, twitter.com/stuffbybez, instagram.com/stuffbybez. I'm on Twitch and YouTube, where I stream every day at 10 a.m. UK time. Twitch for the best conversation and chat. YouTube, if you want to watch after the facts, is probably better. If you want to know what I'm streaming about in future, check out stuffbybez.com/streams. or if you want to suggest future topics. Tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday, I don't know what I'm streaming about. Friday, I don't have a lot planned until next Wednesday, when Jessica Metheringham is going to be launching Library Labyrinth, and we'll talk about conveying information via a crowdfunding page and how much information is enough. But generally, I'm just going to be doing whatever comes to me in the morning. And yeah, usually those solo shows might be like half an hour, so quite a bit shorter. But we'll see how we get on. Share, spread the word, and if Alan wants to be found, where would you like to be found?
Well, I'm mainly on email, alan@alanpaull.co.uk or alan@surprisetechgames.co.uk. I am occasionally on Twitter on as Benthamfish, or indeed Surprise Stare if you want to do something in terms of the company. We have our website, surprisetechgames.co.uk. I'm also this Friday I am doing a podcast with Tabletop Gaming, which I think they're recording. I don't know when it'll be actually released. The magazine talking about Kingmaker.
Awesome.
So that'll be quite exciting. See how that goes. I'll be taking along lots of visuals, because obviously visuals are very important for podcasts. Yeah. Bit like some of the Radio 4 stuff you get, where they do lots of
where you kind of describe what you're seeing.
Things. Yeah, exactly.
And you'll get to hear the interviewers' reactions, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the thing about these games. Podcasts about games are interesting because you haven't got the visuals, have you?
I want to say thank you, everyone. It's been a lovely chat. It's been lovely having you all. Thank you, Alex and Josie and Nicholas and Joseph and Jess. There's a lot of people with J's in their names today. And of course, most importantly, thank you very much, Alan, for being part of the show. And I look forward to chatting again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
Preparation and expectations?
Sorry?
Presumably we'll chat quickly about Aircon preparation and expectations.
I think we will. Is it before Aircon or after Aircon?
It's the day up before.
I remember. Day before. Oh, right. Good.
It's on Wednesday.
Oh, that's lovely. We'll talk then. Yes, we'll have a long drive to York then, but we'll talk then.
Okay.
Yes, good.
And
it's
for
been great.
now,
Thank you.
The only thing left to say is bye. This is goodbye song. Bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye. This is the end of the show. Bye. And now it's time to go. Bye. This is goodbye song. Bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye. This is the end of the show. Bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, everyone. Bye, Alan.
Bye, Bears.
Bye.
Speak soon. Bye.